Good morning. Happy Tuesday. It's a little foggy this morning. I kind of like it. There's patches though. So I've been walking in and out of fog. Quick way to spot an idiot: if somebody talks about constitutional law attorneys, generally in regards to me, in regards to family law. Here's a quick tip. There are no attorneys that I am aware of that call themselves constitutional law attorneys. You have attorneys generally tend to name themselves their fields of practice as far as the causes of action are concerned. So I think what those dipshits mean is civil rights attorney, and I've never been a plaintiff or represented a plaintiff on a civil rights cause of action, unfortunately, but we'll get there. Or criminal defense attorney. And I've never actually represented anyone on a criminal defense. I have participated in the process as an associate attorney, but I have never actually represented someone in criminal defense. Unless you count traffic, but that doesn't really count in my book. Anyway, question was raised yesterday in my Discord about, I'm going to rephrase it, about why the cops are supposed to and should enforce laws that may be unconstitutional. Well, it goes to the way our political system works. The legislative body makes the law. Now, the legislative body is typically going to be assisted by lawyers. The United States Congress has a whole office of attorneys that all they do is they research. They look at what the proposed law is calling for. They look at what existing precedent is, and they try to apply it, and they try to advise congressmen and senators on whether or not a particular bill is going to be constitutional. And these are very learned people. These are typically very good attorneys who have all the time and resources at their beck and call to do the research. And they get it wrong sometimes. So, Joe YouTube lawyer who never graduated from high school calling something unconstitutional, well, he's got a lower chance of getting it right than these guys do. But the legislative branch makes the law. They write it. They say this is what the law is. That's the role in our particular form of government. The executive branch, of which the police are a part, enforces the law. That's the role. The police don't have, the police may choose in their discretion not to enforce a law, but that doesn't change the law. I hear a lot of people have used the police not enforcing a particular law as somehow suggesting that particular law is unenforceable. And it isn't. It just means that particular officer didn't decide to enforce that law. Another officer may come along and enforce it. The same officer might enforce it on a different day. He might just not have been in the mood. It's a meaningless exercise. The branch of government that gets to determine whether or not a particular piece of legislation is or is not constitutional is the judicial branch. But the judicial branch has rules as regarding who gets to go in front of them, who gets to have a case to bring to the judicial branch for the judicial branch to determine whether or not a bill is unconstitutional. They're not going to look at it in a vacuum. They're not going to look at the words on a piece of paper in a vacuum and determine whether or not it's constitutional. That would be overstepping the bounds, because they don't know just from the piece of paper what the legislative branch intended or how the executive branch executed that particular law. So in order to get in front of the court, there is a process that it has to go through. And you've probably heard me say it before, RAMPS, R-A-M-P-S. The court has to determine whether or not the subject matter is ripe. And if a law has never been enforced, it may not be ripe. They have to consider whether or not they want to apply one of the abstention doctrines. There's the Pullman abstention doctrine, which you may not have heard, which is a doctrine in the federal courts that they want to allow state courts to interpret the laws and determine the constitutionality of the laws before it gets to the federal court. Why, you ask? Well, because states have rights and states have certain powers, and the state court might interpret a law in such a way as to make it constitutional, whereas just the law on paper may not appear to be constitutional. One of the places that you may see that is, for example, in the disorderly conduct statutes that have a speech element to them. If the statute itself doesn't limit itself on its face to fighting words, to words that tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace, but the state courts, when they review it, when they make a determination on what that particular statute means, if they limit it to fighting words, then all of a sudden what appears to be an unconstitutional statute is suddenly constitutional. That's the Pullman doctrine. The other one is the Younger abstention doctrine. You're seeing that right now in Leon Valley. They're going to wait for the state prosecutions to conclude before they move forward with the lawsuits. And there are state abstention doctrines as well. I'm kind of focusing on the federal courts because when you're talking about constitutionality, generally speaking, people are thinking of suing in federal court. So that was the A. M is mootness. You've seen that right now. They're talking about that with regards to the New York statute, the New York City ordinance, I believe, that doesn't allow people to travel with their firearms. And you see that also in cases where they restrict a woman's right to abortion. You know, by the time she gets to federal court or something like that, she's already had the kid. So, you know, it's a moot issue now. Well, if it's capable of repetition and, you know, all the state has to do is delay it for 9 months every time, then the court will be more likely to look at it. The P is a political question. The courts aren't there to determine whether or not Trump is a bad person or who you should vote for, things like that. The court's there to determine legal matters. And then the S is standing, and that's the big one for us today. Standing. You have to actually have been injured to have standing. And it doesn't have to be a physical injury, obviously, but it could be, you know, an injury to your ability to do something, or maybe you were arrested, or maybe you had something taken from you as a result of this law, and now you have standing to sue. And standing, it can't be some theoretical thing, some hypothetical thing, some intangible thing. Like, you can't sue because you're a concerned taxpayer, generally speaking. The court's not going to give you standing to sue on that. And that's why you see groups like, that's why I see special advocacy groups will wait for someone to be injured by it, and then they will sue in that person's name instead of just going in there and tackling the law straight up. So it's because they're waiting for someone with standing. Because if there's no standing, then the case gets tossed out. So we're going to wrap this all around to the beginning. If the police don't enforce the law, even if they think it may be unconstitutional, then no one ever gets standing to challenge the law. And the next cop who comes along may enforce it, or it may just hang looming like a sort of Damocles over you your entire life, because no one ever gets standing. So it needs to be enforced. Now, once a court determines that that particular statute is unconstitutional, or a court determines how it must be enforced in order to stay constitutional, if the police ignore that, then they're being tyrannical. Then you can raise a fuss about it and say they're being oppressive and they're enforcing unconstitutional laws. But until a court's had an opportunity to make a determination on whether or not the statute is in fact unconstitutional, the sad fact is you don't know. You're guessing at this point, and the cop may have a different guess. And you probably should take that into account, that smarter men than you and smarter men than me, and women, obviously, smarter men and women than you and smarter men and women than me, have had a chance to review these particular pieces of legislation generally, and have determined that they're not unconstitutional, that they are, in fact, they do comport with the Constitution before they're signed into law. Now, whether or not those people are right or wrong is a different story, but you get the idea. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this was informative, and have a great day.